The rain came down in sheets, a cold November fury that turned the gravel shoulder of the county road to soup. From his window, Arthur Pendleton watched the headlights of the broken-down sedan slice weakly through the deluge. He'd seen them flicker and die a half-hour ago, a small vessel foundering in the storm. Inside, he knew, was a world of trouble. He was 78 years old, and the bones in his back ached with the memory of every cold, wet night he had ever endured. It would be easy to turn away, to draw the curtains and let the world handle its own. But his wife, Clara, had never been one for drawing curtains. "Someone's out there, Arthur." He could almost hear her whisper, a gentle echo in the quiet house. "You can't just leave them." He sighed, the sound lost in the drumming of rain on the tin roof of his porch. Pulling on his old canvas coat, the one stained with grease and time, he grabbed the heavy lantern from the hook by the door. The flame inside the glass flickered to life, a small, stubborn star against the oppressive dark. The wind hit him the moment he stepped outside, a physical blow that tried to steal his breath. He leaned into it, his worn boots sinking into the mud as he made his way down the long driveway. The lantern cast a halo of wavering gold, illuminating the churning puddles and the skeletal branches of the maple trees that lined his property. When he reached the car, he saw them. A young man, his face pale with worry, was trying to shield his pregnant wife as she sat in the passenger seat, a small, sleeping child bundled in her arms. The young man looked up, his expression a mixture of fear and suspicion as Arthur's light fell upon him. "Engine's dead," the young man said, his voice tight. "Phone has no signal." Arthur simply nodded, his gaze soft. He saw not a stranger, but a story as old as the road itself. "Cold's setting in. My house is just up the drive. There's soup on the stove and warm blankets. You can call for a tow in the morning, when the storm passes." The young man hesitated, a city dweller's caution warring with the desperation in his eyes. He looked at his wife, who gave a small, trusting nod. "We wouldn't want to impose," he said, though his shoulders had already begun to slump with relief. "It's no imposition," Arthur replied, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "It's just what's done." He led them back to the small, sturdy farmhouse his father had built. Inside, the warmth of the wood stove wrapped around them. Arthur served them bowls of thick vegetable soup, the steam rising to fog the windows. He gave the child, a little girl with sleepy blue eyes, a cup of warm milk. He did not ask for their story or offer much of his own. He simply provided a sanctuary, a quiet harbor from the storm. The family, whose names he learned were Ben, Sarah, and Lily, slept in the spare room, the one that had been empty since Clara passed. The next morning, the sky was a clean, polished gray. After a breakfast of toast and coffee, Arthur went out to look at their car. He diagnosed the problem in minutes: a cracked radiator hose, split from age and stress. He didn't have a new one, but he had the ingenuity of a man who had spent a lifetime making do. With a piece of salvaged rubber, some sealant, and a pair of sturdy clamps from his workshop, he fashioned a temporary repair. "This will get you to a proper garage in the next town," he said, wiping his hands on an old rag. "Drive steady." Ben, his face etched with a profound gratitude, pulled out his wallet. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you. Please, let me pay you for the room, for the food, for this." Arthur held up a hand, stopping him. The lines around his eyes softened. "No need for that. But I have to give you something." Arthur looked past him, toward the ancient oak tree that stood sentinel in the yard, its branches a sprawling testament to the seasons it had weathered. Clara had planted it as a sapling the year they were married. "Tell you what," Arthur said quietly, "you just pass it on. Someone else, down the road, finds themselves in a spot of trouble. You be the one with the lantern. That'll be payment enough." Ben stared at the old man, at the quiet strength in his gaze, and felt a lump form in his throat. He put his wallet away and simply shook Arthur's hand. "I will," he promised. "I swear I will." Arthur watched them drive away until their car was just a speck on the horizon. Then he turned back to his house, To the silence and the routine, the memory of the young family already fading like a pleasant dream. He had other things on his mind, things that gnawed at the edges of his peace. The letters had been arriving for months. First one, then another, each more insistent than the last. They came on the crisp letterhead of a law firm representing a corporate entity called Viridian Development Group. They spoke of progress, of community revitalization, of a new commercial plaza that would bring jobs and prosperity to the sleepy town of Havenwood. Arthur's property, a 10-acre parcel of land that had been in his family for over a century, sat exactly where they wanted to build their flagship department store. His farm was the last piece of the puzzle, the final holdout. The letters offered a sum that was insulting, a fraction of what the land was worth, not in dollars but in memory. He ignored them, hoping they would go away, but they were replaced by certified mail from the town council. The language shifted from offers to warnings. Zoning ordinances, public utility easements, eminent domain. The words were cold, sterile, designed to intimidate. Arthur felt like a ghost on his own land. He would walk the fields his father had plowed. His hand brushing against the rough bark of the barn he had helped maintain his entire life. This was not just dirt and wood. It was the repository of his existence. It was the place he had returned to after the war, the place where he had healed. It was where he and Clara had built a life, where every fence post and fieldstone held a story. To lose it would be like having the final pages of his life torn out and discarded. He decided he had to speak. He could not let them erase him without a word. The town hall meeting was held in a sterile, fluorescent-lit room that smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy. The council members sat on a raised dais, their expressions ranging from bored to vaguely apologetic. At a table to the side sat a man in a perfectly tailored suit, his silver hair immaculate, his smile thin and predatory. This was Mr. Crow, the lawyer for Viridian Development. Arthur waited his turn. When his name was called, he walked to the podium, his work-worn hands gripping the wooden edges. He was not an orator. His voice, when it came, was soft, unaccustomed to public spaces. "My name is Arthur Pendleton," he began, his eyes scanning the impassive faces before him. "I live out on the old county road. My father, his name was Thomas, he built our house in 1936. Built the barn with his own 2 hands. He paused, gathering his thoughts. That land, it's seen a lot. My mother's garden was by the porch. My wife, Clara, she planted the big oak tree you can see from the road. We watched it grow for 50 years. It's not just a piece of property. It's my life. It's all I have left of them." He looked directly at the council. "I know you're talking about progress. I understand that. But sometimes progress asks too high a price. Some things shouldn't be for sale." When he finished, a heavy silence filled the room. It was broken by Mr. Crow, who stood up and walked casually toward the podium, as if to physically displace Arthur's simple testimony. "Mr. Pendleton," Crow said, his voice smooth and condescending, dripping with a false sympathy that was more insulting than outright hostility. "We all appreciate a good story. Nostalgia is a powerful sentiment." He turned to the council. "But progress cannot be held hostage by nostalgia. Havenwood needs to move forward." He then turned his attention back to Arthur, his eyes cold and dismissive. "Frankly, your claim is tenuous. Our surveyors have noted significant discrepancies with the century-old deed you possess. The property lines are ambiguous. Furthermore," he added, his voice lowering to a confidential, patronizing tone, "we have made a very generous offer, an offer that would allow you to transition into a more suitable living arrangement. I've heard the new senior facility on the west side of town is quite lovely. Less to worry about. No leaky roofs or fields to mow." Each word was a small, sharp jab. He was not just taking Arthur's land. He was invalidating his entire life, his ability to care for himself, his right to exist where he had always existed. Arthur felt a hot flush of shame creep up his neck. He looked at the council members, but they avoided his gaze, shuffling papers, looking at the clock on the wall. They were letting it happen. Mr. Crow delivered the final cut. The fact is, Mr. Pendleton, your time on that land is over. It's a matter of when, not if. We can do this the easy way or we can do this the legal way. Either way, the result is the same. Arthur stood there for a moment, stripped bare under the flat, uncaring lights. He felt profoundly and utterly alone. He had survived a war, had buried a wife, had faced down storms and droughts and the relentless march of time. But this quiet, bureaucratic humiliation felt like a different kind of death. He turned without another word and walked out of the room, the sound of his own footsteps echoing the hollowness inside him. He didn't feel anger, only a deep, crushing weariness, the feeling of being erased. In the state capital, 200 miles away, Ben Carter was reviewing budget proposals when a small article from a regional news aggregator caught his eye. The headline was mundane. Havenwood Council considers eminent domain for development project. He almost scrolled past it, but the name Pendleton snagged his attention. He clicked the link. The article was brief, a dry summary of the town hall meeting. It mentioned an elderly landowner, Arthur Pendleton, who had spoken against the project. Ben felt a jolt. Couldn't be a coincidence. He read the developer's lawyer's dismissive quotes, his patronizing remarks. He saw his savior, the man who had brought his family in from the storm, who had fixed his car with his bare hands and asked for nothing in return, being painted as a confused old man, an obstacle. A cold anger, precise and sharp, settled in Ben's chest. He had made a promise on that gravel driveway. Pass it on. He picked up his phone and made a call to a friend in the county clerk's office. An hour later, he had a copy of the property deed. It was old, but it was ironclad. Then, acting on a hunch, he made another call, this one to the Department of Veterans Affairs. He gave them Arthur's name and date of birth. The information came back that afternoon in a secured email. Ben opened the file and felt the air leave his lungs. Arthur Pendleton, Sergeant U.S. Army.
Combat médic, un 5 cavalerie division.
Việt Nam, 1968, 1969.
The record listed his citations. A Purple Heart, for wounds received in action, and below it a Silver Star for gallantry. Ben read the description of the action. During a brutal firefight in the A Shau Valley, Private First Class Pendleton had, under heavy enemy fire and after being wounded himself, repeatedly left a position of cover to drag 6 wounded comrades to safety. He had saved every man in his platoon who had been hit that day. The men in his unit had called him Doc. This was the man Mr. Crow had suggested should be moved to a lovely senior facility. The man the Havenwood Town Council was willing to discard for a department store. Ben printed the documents and walked down the hall to the governor's office. Governor Marcus Miller was a man who understood the weight of such things. A West Point graduate and a veteran of the Gulf War, he had built his political career on a foundation of integrity and a fierce loyalty to those who had served. He listened intently as Ben recounted the entire story. The breakdown in the storm, the quiet kindness of the old man, the soup, the repaired hose, the refusal of payment. Then Ben laid the military service record on the polished desk, next to the article about the town hall meeting. "They're humiliating him, Governor," Ben said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "They're trying to erase a man who saved 6 of his brothers while under fire, all for a commercial plaza." Governor Miller read the citation for the Silver Star, his expression hardening. He looked at the picture of Arthur's farmhouse from the county assessor's website, the simple, proud structure, the ancient oak tree beside it. He saw more than a building. He saw a sanctuary, a monument to a life of quiet honor. "In the Army," the governor said, his voice low and steely, "we have a creed. We never leave a fallen comrade. That doesn't end when you take off the uniform." He looked at Ben. "What's the legal status of the eminent domain proceedings?" "The final notice is scheduled to be delivered in 2 days," Ben replied. "Crow and a town official are going out to the farm to serve him personally." The governor stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the capital city. "No, they're not," he said. "Get the car ready, Ben. You and I are going to pay a visit to Havenwood. No press, no fanfare. Just a drive in the country, he turned back, a grim set to his jaw. It's time someone reminded Mr. Crow and that town council what the word legacy actually means. Word of Arthur's plight had begun to ripple through Havenwood in the days following the meeting. A few people who had been there, a retired teacher and a young farmer, had been disgusted by Crow's condescension. They spoke to their neighbors. The local reporter, feeling he'd missed the real story, wrote a follow-up piece, a human interest story that focused not on the development, but on Arthur and his family's history on the land. Slowly, quietly, the community began to respond. It wasn't a protest with signs and shouts. It was a subtle, steady current of support. One morning, Arthur found a basket of late-season tomatoes and a jar of honey on his porch. The next day, a freshly baked apple pie. The young farmer from the meeting showed up with his tractor and, without being asked, mowed the far field that had become overgrown. "Figured you could use a hand, Mr. Pendleton," he'd said, tipping his hat before driving off. These small gestures were bulwarks against the shame he'd felt. They were quiet affirmations that he was not invisible, that his life still had meaning in the place he called home. He felt a fissure of hope in the wall of his despair. On the morning the final notice was due, Arthur sat on his porch swing, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. He watched the gravel road, expecting the arrival of Mr. Crow's sleek, merciless sedan. He didn't know what he would do, what he would say. He only knew he would not leave. Around 10 o'clock, 2 cars appeared, stirring up dust as they turned into his long driveway. The first was the familiar silver luxury car of the lawyer. Mr. Crow and a pinched-faced man from the town council got out, holding a manila envelope that felt like a death sentence. But it was the second car that made them stop in their tracks. It was a simple, unassuming black sedan, the kind that speaks of quiet authority. The driver's side door opened, and Ben Carter got out. Then the passenger door opened, and Governor Marcus Miller emerged, dressed not in a suit, but in a simple blazer and slacks. He took in the scene, the old farmhouse, the towering oak, the 2 officials frozen in place, and Arthur watching from the porch. Crow's smug expression dissolved into a mask of stunned disbelief. The town official looked as if he might faint. The governor ignored them completely. He walked directly toward the porch, his steps measured and respectful. He stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at Arthur. "Mr. Pendleton?" he said, his voice clear and calm. "My name is Marcus Miller. I believe you know my chief of staff, Ben Carter," he gestured to Ben, who gave Arthur a warm, grateful smile. Arthur, confused, slowly stood up. "Ah yes, Governor." Governor Miller's eyes, however, held a different kind of recognition. He took a step closer, his voice lowering with reverence. "Sir, I was told that in the A Shao Valley, they called you Doc." The name hit Arthur like a physical force. Doc, no one had called him that in 50 years. It was a name from another life, another world. A name he had buried deep within himself along with the screams and the blood and the desperate prayers whispered in the jungle. In that single moment, the shame that had been branded on him in the town hall meeting was extinguished, replaced by the sudden, shocking light of being truly seen. His shoulders, which had been stooped with the weight of his fight, straightened. The governor then turned his attention to Crow and the town official, who were still standing by their car as if rooted to the spot. His tone was not loud or angry, but it was forged from steel. "Mr. Crow," he said, "this farm is not merely a parcel of land. It is the home of a decorated veteran of this state, a man who was awarded the Silver Star for his courage. It is a piece of our history." He let the words hang in the air. "There are state funds for historical preservation. There are statutes to protect sites of cultural and historical significance. As of this morning, I have instructed my office to begin the process of designating the Pendleton farmstead a protected state landmark." He looked from the ashen-faced lawyer to the trembling official. "This land is not for sale. It will not be taken. The Viridian Project will find another location. I trust you will inform your clients," he paused, his gaze unwavering. "And I trust the town of Havenwood will remember who its real pillars are." He didn't need to raise his voice. He had not humbled them with the power of his office, but with the moral weight of Arthur's forgotten legacy. Crow, for the first time, was speechless, his legal threats turned to dust. The manila envelope in his hand now seemed pathetic, an artifact of a battle that was already lost. The governor did not linger on his victory. He turned back to Arthur, his expression softening once more. He dismissed the two men with a slight nod, and they scrambled back to their car and retreated down the driveway in a cloud of shame. "May I?" the governor asked, gesturing to the porch swing. For the next hour they sat and talked, not about politics or development but about life. They talked about service, about coming home, about the quiet solace of the land. Before he left, the governor reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy, bronze coin. It wasn't the official state seal. On it was the insignia of an infantry division and a simple, engraved motto: "Never leave a comrade." "This is a personal one," Governor Miller said, pressing it into Arthur's calloused palm. "From one soldier to another. Thank you for your service, document. Then and now." Arthur closed his hand around the coin, its weight a solid, grounding presence. He could only nod, his throat too tight for words. He watched as the governor and Ben got back in their car and drove away, leaving him in the quiet of his reclaimed sanctuary. Weeks later, the air held the crisp promise of winter. The threat from Viridian had vanished, the town council suddenly sending Arthur polite letters of apology and commendation. He paid them little mind. His life returned to its rhythm, but it was a new rhythm, one underscored by a quiet sense of peace. One Saturday morning, another car pulled up the driveway. It was Ben Carter, with his wife Sarah, her belly now round and full with the promise of new life. "Thought you could use a hand with that barn wall," Ben said, pulling a tool belt from his trunk. For the rest of the afternoon they worked together. The sound of a hammer striking nails echoed in the clear air, a sound not of demolition, but of restoration. Arthur showed Ben how to measure and cut the new cedar planks, how to fit them into the weathered frame. As they worked, Sarah sat on the porch swing, reading a book, a serene presence against the backdrop of the old house. Late in the day, Arthur paused, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked at Ben, a good man keeping a promise. He looked at the barn, stronger than it was that morning. He looked out at the land, his land, safe and quiet under the descending sun. His gaze fell upon his workbench, where the governor's challenge coin sat, its bronze surface catching the last rays of light. He felt Clara's presence beside him, not as a whisper of memory, but as a warm, living part of the peace that surrounded him. He picked up his hammer, its familiar weight comfortable in his hand. With a steady arm, he drove the final nail home, its sharp report a declaration. He was still here. His life was not over. It was being rebuilt.